It's really what it is. It's the Lantern's version of a Stuart McLean Vinyl Cafe morning is really kind of what it's all about. Anytime an artist gets up and performs or does a bit of a craft, he or she is taking a risk. In 2 weeks, 5 people are going to come up on a Sunday morning to do 360 and talk about a few things. They're going to be taking a risk, 5 people. But 6 people this morning are going to be taking that kind of a risk. And it's distracting me. It's beautiful, but I'm listening to you and I can't do it anymore, Jake. This is Jake, who drove in from Pittsburgh. Jake writes, creates his own music, has several albums out. I'm really grateful that he's going to bookend this morning. He started us this morning, and he's going to end us this morning too. At the end, we're going to have a couple announcements. We're going to have an offering, and then we're going to hear some more of Jake. In a moment, our very own Graham Lauber is going to be coming up and share a story about his family's past. And then Brian Bailey, our very own Brian Bailey, and his good-looking daughter, where are they all? Back there? Yes, there they are, all ready to go. Will come up and sing and play their own song. The point of Back Porch Stories is to come up with something original, your own kind of creation. So Brian's going to come up after Graham. And then we've got another story about Pete, who lives right next door here in Inglewood. And it will be told in 2 parts. And between those parts, Marty Hafka is going to come up and really capture the whole morning in a song that he's written. And not that everyone else is not going to be good, but I think for me, Marty's song is going to be a highlight. No pressure though, Marty. But I've heard it, and it's just beautiful. So thanks for coming. Thanks for considering to bring a friend. And Graham, if I could ask you to come up and start us off.
I woke up this morning, the situation was absurd. I woke up this morning, the situation was absurd. My dog had eaten my Bible. He had a hunger for the word. All right, that's the sound check. Ina and Ilag. When I was a child, I had an aunt named Ina. Ina wasn't my blood relative. She had been the wife of my Uncle Elsie. They had weird names back then. Who had been the brother of my grandmother. Uncle Elsie died years before I was born, and Aunt Ina had gone to live closer to her relatives in the United States. So I only met her once or twice. But when I did meet her, she always told some pretty interesting stories. Aunt Ina and Uncle Elsie became missionaries during the Second World War. At that time, everyone believed that being a missionary was the highest calling a person could follow, and that missionaries couldn't be loaded down with trivial responsibilities like looking after their children. So Aunt Ina and Uncle Elsie farmed their kids out to other families, most of whom were happy to take children who were old enough to work on a farm. They then headed to Montreal to board a ship bound for Africa so that they could take the good news to the people of Kenya. Ina had her doubts about this arrangement, and as they walked up the gangplank toward their new lives, my gentle aunt put her hand on her husband's arm. "We could still turn back," she whispered. "It's not too late yet." They didn't turn back, but they never made it to Africa either, because on the way, their ship was torpedoed by a German submarine. Many of the passengers, including my aunt and uncle, ended up as prisoners of war in Germany, where they remained for the duration, a period of several years. If you had to be a POW during the Second World War, the best situation you could have hoped for was to be a German prisoner in a Canadian camp, one at Medicine Hat or down at Lethbridge. The second best option would have been to have been a female citizen of a Commonwealth nation in a German camp. The Germans tended to treat their Canadian prisoners in accordance with the Geneva Convention, and conditions in the so-called ilags, or civilian prison camps, were nothing like the more famous experiences endured in the concentration camps. Which is not to say that conditions were pleasant in the ilags by any means. Try to imagine, if you can, the stress of being locked up for days, then for weeks, then for months, and finally years. Ina was separated from her husband and her children, and she was always worried about what was happening to them. Rations within the camp were kept just above starvation levels. 2 meals a day consisting of 1 piece of moldy black bread and some very thin potato gruel. Hunger was a constant gnawing companion, and many prisoners did not survive the malnourishment. Worst of all were the guards. Early on, a few were pleasant and tried to connect with the prisoners, but they quickly stopped being friendly when they saw other less sociable guards who put an end to any and all conversations. Prisoners' beds and belongings were searched regularly, and even minor infractions of the rules were dealt with harshly. The fact that the prisoners didn't always know what the rules were was of no concern to the Germans. Prisoners disappeared all the time, and no one knew why or if the missing women had been released, or if they'd moved to another camp, or something much worse. Most frightening of all were the Gestapo. The secret police would show up at random times to perform thorough searches of the women's bug-infested beds and belongings, trying to find anything that might incriminate them and justify the most severe punishments. Many women disappeared after these surprise raids, and it was discovered later that most of them were transferred to Buchenwald, the dreaded concentration camp. Ina did her best to stay busy during these years. She led a Bible study, served the women in the camp by doing their laundry and sharing her food with them, and she prayed. She prayed for the other prisoners, prayed for an end to the war, prayed for the husband who was missing to her, and for her children back home, and she even prayed for the soldiers who sometimes made life so hard. As the war began to draw to a close, conditions began to worsen. Food became even scarcer, and the guards more distracted and more harsh. Fear was everywhere. The area controlled by Germany began to get smaller, and the Germans started to move their prisoners closer to the center of their territory. Ina eventually found herself loaded onto a train boxcar. The crowded conditions were horrible, the smells disgusting, the rations practically non-existent, the guards more afraid and more cruel than ever. And Ina continued to pray. Eventually, the train stopped, and the big doors on the side of the car were opened. 2 large German soldiers appeared, peering at the women huddled together inside. One looked at a piece of paper in his hand and then said, in the kind of booming voice that had terrified the prisoners for so many years, "Is Ina still here?" Ina felt an icy chill. She had seen so much, lost so many friends, sacrificed everything that mattered to do what she believed God wanted her to do, and now this, the one thing that every prisoner dreaded, their name called by a German soldier. Ina turned to the woman beside her. "That's me. Do you think I have to answer? They might not be able to find me amongst all these people." The woman beside her looked at her with pity but said, "I think you have to. They'll find you eventually. It'll be easier for you if you answer now." And so, her heart burning, Ina Steele put up her hand. Both soldiers noticed Ina's hand at the same moment, and their large, steel-helmeted heads swiveled toward her. And then something remarkable happened. Their big, Teutonic faces broke into dumb grins, and together they shouted, "Happy birthday!" Ina stared at them, not quite understanding what had just happened. The soldiers looked at her and laughed. And then they said, "Happy birthday" again, and they closed the doors and they left. In the darkness they left behind, Ina realized that today was her birthday. The guards must have seen it in her records and decided to present her with one of the strangest, most unexpected, most flat-out freaky birthday greetings ever given in the history of armed conflict. A lawyer once asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" The answer he got was also strange and unexpected. The Samaritan was the mortal enemy of the poor Jew who had been beaten and robbed, the last person who should have been willing to help. Who is your neighbor? Anybody, everybody who shows mercy. Chesterton once observed that the Bible tells us to love both our neighbor and our enemy because they're often the same person. It's possible that the German guards were trying to be cruel, that they were relishing that moment of terror they created for my aunt while she stared at them in horror and waited for the other jackboot to drop. But it's also possible, and far more likely, that they were inspired by a better spirit. That same spirit that motivated the Samaritan in Jesus' story, the spirit of helping whoever needs help, the spirit of unexpected mercy. It's possible that the guards were just following the command that says you look after the person who needs you, whether they're in the next house, the next town, or the next train car. It's possible that they were just being neighborly. Thank you.
Well, I'm Brian Bailey. This is my daughter Erica. Erica graduated yesterday. So the fact that she's here on Sunday morning is pretty impressive. So this song is about, I wrote this song actually almost exactly 8 years ago today. And I wrote it right before the May long weekend. And based on my mother's experience this morning, it's one of those traffic days where everything was a little congested. And I was driving down Deerfoot Trail and I got to my work. The kind of work I was doing, I was working with the disabled community. And I had my guitar with me, and I sat down with my friend Mike, and I said, "Mike, I think we need to write a song." So we wrote this song. It's about making changes, and how in our lives we try and make changes, but sometimes those changes take a bit more time than we expect. But you know they have to be made. Red truck, green light, yellow sun, it's shining so bright. And it's time for a change. Different trail is moving so slow. Hit the highway and it's off I go. And it's time for a change. Well, it's time for making changes. Ain't nothing like changes for taking time. Well, it's time for making changes. Ain't nothing like changes for taking time. Gonna leave those old troubles behind. Let go stuff and clear my mind. It's time
for change. Held on the past for way too long. I'm gonna write my life a brand new song. It's time for a change. Well, it's time for making changes. It ain't not like changes for taking time. Well, it's time for making changes. It ain't not like changes for taking time. The world is moving way too fast. All I need is green skies and blue grass. It's time for a change. So it's down to the river I go. Let that cool water soothe my soul. And it's time for a change. Well, it's time for making changes. Not like changes for taking time. Well, it's time for making changes. It ain't not like changes for taking time. Ain't not like changes, not like changes, not like changes, not like changes, not like changes for taking time. Ain't not like changes, 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 taking time.
Thank you.
Pete got into bed carefully. It had taken him 10 minutes to get everything ready. That was no surprise because every night was the same. If Mary was still awake, she would have watched, annoyed. Oh, maybe not anymore. She had expressed expression at the beginning of their marriage. Just come to bed, she had said back then. But tonight, she was long gone, having seen the performance before. Pete needed all 10 minutes, though. A glass of water was placed deftly next to the pillow on the little nightstand. Pete knew how to grab it in the middle of the night without knocking it over, mostly. Both humidifiers were filled and already pumping tropical air into the dry Alberta night. Night socks on, night t-shirt on, toilet paper on the nightstand in case he had to blow his nose. Teeth brushed, shower done, cleaner than a baby's bottom. Pete had become Mary's worst nightmare. Finicky. Finicky with an affiliate named Routine. Laundry on, dishwasher on. Pete figured he might as well run them at night. I guess, Mary had said. He got into bed quietly, rolled on his side. It was already past midnight, but the night was just beginning. He was looking forward to getting back into his novel, Lone Wolf by Jodi Picoult. He still had the previous night's read running through his mind. He had thought about it all day long. The novel was a true story about an eccentric guy who goes to live with a pack of wolves. Pete had a difficult time imagining Luke, the main character, being accepted by these creatures. But apparently the animals had been curious about him and had accepted him as the black sheep in the family, so to speak, albeit at the extreme bottom rung of their social ladder. Pete wondered how Luke's ego could handle that. Pete also imagined these middle-rung wolves talking behind Luke's back. Look at the tail on that guy. Yeah, not much there. And his rump is balder than an ego's forehead. I say we kill him and have him for breakfast. Anyway, the back of the book said it was all true, so it must be. Last night, Pete got to the touching part of the novel where Luke had nearly been killed. It made him all emotional. When he told Mary about it in the light of day the next morning, though it didn't seem so incredible, Mary hadn't been sure what the big deal was. You see, the pack had gone off on a hunt and had left a younger male wolf and his sister behind to patrol and protect the perimeter of the territory. It was blistering hot, and Luke had attempted to go down to the stream to cool off, get a drink. No sooner had I reached the water, however, according to Luke in Picot's novel, the young male tackled me, knocking the wind from me. He growled and snapped at my face, eyes blazing and teeth bared, in full attack mode. I immediately rolled over, asking the wolf for his trust, stunned by this behavior. It was the first time since I'd been accepted by the pack that I truly believed my life was in danger, and worse, at the hands of one of my wolf brothers. Pete continued to read about how the wolf had scared Luke into a twisted wooden skeleton formed by several enormous trees that had fallen during a thunderstorm. Luke was trapped there for 4 hours until the young male finally changed his posture and invited Luke back to the river. Reaching the stream, he understood. Luke discovered a pile of fresh scat that did not resemble anything he had encountered before, and beside it, in the soft mud, was a perfectly well-preserved, huge paw print of a mountain lion. The young wolf had been trying to save my life, said Luke. But that's not what had fascinated Pete. That was cool and all, but nothing to write home about. It was the next part that fascinated Pete. Luke says, there isn't love between wolves. It's an unconditional commitment. If you do your job, a lifetime tour of duty, then you are part of the family. You need the others in the pack to complete you. The young wolf had protected me, but not because of an emotional bond, but because I was an accepted part of the pack. And then the part that really got Pete. Yet deep down, in the part of me that was still human, Luke wrote, I wish he had protected me because he loved me as much as I loved him. Luke left the wolf pack the next day after devoting 2 years of study to its nature. Pete turned off the reading light and let the story wash over him before turning the light back on again to blow his nose. Mary groaned in her sleep as he turned the light back off again. Pete lay awake for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, though not being able to see it. Flat on his back, he realized another day. He thought about nothing in particular except another 24 hours had passed. There was no stopping it. He ruminated on the day like he focused on the ceiling. Nothing came to mind but a low melancholy. Why was he so doggone emotional about this silly wolf story? He was way past 50 years on the planet now, and every day with Mary and the kids was precious. How many more days? He had buried his grandfather, 7 years ago, and his own dad 2 years ago. How many more weeks away from this day would he reflect on this precious moment and wish it back? You can't bottle precious moments. Things are good now, he thought, right now. I'm alive and Mary's safe and the children are close. near. I'm human, and I can feel love. I know it. Yet he felt things slipping away, intangible, like an emotion. Perhaps he should turn on the light again. And to put a cherry on top of it all, they even had their own wolf. Well, actually a dog, a pack dog. Pete hadn't been sure about a dog. As a kid, along with his siblings, he had wanted a puppy, but their mother had wanted nothing to do with it. They belong on a farm, she said. And besides, she had enough work cleaning up after 5 kids. Soon, dog thoughts waned, and everyone agreed not to ask for it anymore. It just riled Mom up. But Mary's family had always had a dog. There were no questions for Mary. As an adult, Peter associated city dogs with a lot of poop. Not exactly sure where that came from. Probably came from the fact that people left their pets' dung all over the neighborhood, and nothing irritated him more than that. Well, maybe the Palestinian conflict raised bigger issues of justice, but this excrement was close at hand, or closer at feet, as in closer on your shoe bottoms. His mother had been right. Farm dogs don't poop. It's those city dogs that have the problem. Mind you, early in their marriage, having babies concerned Pete too. Again, with the amount of feces he imagined would be generated. All that stink, all those diapers, all that wiping. But within weeks of having Andrew, Pete was changing diapers quicker than a cowboy roping at a rodeo. He even whistled, proficiently inspecting all the crevices where waste might dare to hide. Mary said he was the best, the lovingest. Pete beamed with pride because he thought Mary really meant it. It took him about 3 weeks to figure out why she was complimenting him. And from there on in, they took turns. There were other people's babies' poop, and there was Andrew's poop. And the difference between the two was the difference between Hitler and Gandhi. Odd, he could change Andrew's diaper without a blush, but the thought of other kids' diapers made him want to hurl. Why was that? Some biological instinct, he wondered? An evolutionary protective predisposition designed to safeguard his species, protect his own precious DNA? Pete had once been told that God created poop to stink, to make sure you didn't eat it. He spent an entire hour thinking about that once, and later regretted it. Pete felt guilty about this self-love, though. Love only for your own stink less offensive. It's hard to love your neighbor like you love yourself. Pete had a hard time getting to like his neighbor. He had even wondered why he enjoyed hearing of the inadequacies of his fellow pack members around the hood. Every deficiency on their part seemed to pad his stats. It was the same with Zorro, their border collie golden retriever cross. There were other dogs' poop, and there was Zorro's poop. Scooping up Zorro's excrement had become a routine without thought. But he refused to come near all the other drawing scat in the dog part. He once wondered why he didn't bother with Zorro's poop then. But at least he was doing his part, that is Zorro's part. At first, it had been Mary and the kids and the dog, with Pete a distant observer. Pete liked it that way. It was cute to see the kids gravitate to the dog. Mary was amazing with him, teaching him to sit and fetch and heel and halt and stay down. The dog was incredible. There was no other dog as well trained in the neighborhood. There was honor in that. Mary always scared Pete, though, when she was yelling at the dog. Every time Mary yelled, "Leave it!" Pete found himself crossing his legs and blushing and sympathizing with the puppy. You're not all that attractive when you're screaming at the dog, Pete once said. Oh, suck it up, Mary had returned. I need this dog to listen. Pete had considered his options: an unattractive wife or an unruly dog. After 30 minutes, Peter wondered why he had given it any thought at all. After a month or two, Pete wasn't calling the dog anymore. The dog had become Zorro. Zorro this and Zorro that. The family soon forgot that he was a dog. He was a member of the family, low member on that pack totem pole. Only when visitors arrived did Zorro become a dog again. It's quite amazing that company isn't quite as fond of your animal pet, your family pet, as you are. They'd politely ask, "Is this your dog, your animal?" And Pete would want to return, "This is Zorro." But instead he'd say something like, "Yes, this is the animal that I'll have to apologize for at some juncture of your visit." And within 5 minutes, the prophecy had been fulfilled. Zorro had been taught not to jump, sort of, but not, for instance, not to sniff. They had tried. A dog apparently doesn't recognize a person's face as much as he identifies a person's smell. No amount of coaching had changed the animal's mind on this. It's when Zorro takes a great big sniff of a person's nether regions that Zorro becomes the dog, Mary's pet. The family had memorized a litany of excuses. "Oh, dogs are like that. Oh, I'm sorry. Down, dog, down." It's only when the visitors take their leave and are exiting the front gate that the dog once again becomes Zorro, the family member. But the truth is, this story isn't so much about Zorro as it is about Pete's neighboring dog. But not even the neighboring dog, as much as it's Pete's neighbors in general, and one in particular.
My name is Marty, and my song is in drop D. How exciting. That sounds right, Dan. Does that sound right? Okay, thank you. So, Ed asked me to write a song, very specifically, sort of related to this story, and I don't usually do that, so I didn't feel terribly capable, but here we are. I managed to cook something up. So, I'll just say that it's about neighbors. It's about pride and insecurity, probably more specifically. And it could have a number of titles. It could be called Love Thy Neighbor. It could be called Good Fences Make Good Neighbors. It could be called The Grass is Always Greener. Any saying that you can apply to your neighbors is probably applicable to this song. So, thanks for indulging me. Sitting in my living room, I can see into your living room. And I see you playing with your kids and helping with the dishes. And suddenly everyone is smiling. And instantly my back is up. And I wonder what is wrong with me. And I know you think you're better 'Cause I'm the one with hopes and dreams that are bigger than your hopes and dreams. And I raise my children right, and I build my fences higher than yours, and my yard is always cleaner, and my grass is always greener. Looking in your house tonight, and I can see your wife is crying. See you are crying. And inside I'm smiling, and I hate myself for smiling. But your pain is equal to my riches, and your failure is my glory. And I know God is on my side, and I believe it with all my heart. 'Cause I don't think I'm a bad person, and I think my heart is kind. 'Cause there is no more right or wrong. There is only yours and mine. Thank you.
There was this other dog in the hood, a white thing, long and low to the ground, a bit overweight, a little slow, and not just on his feet. When Pete was a kid they had called them wiener dogs, although this one was bigger than that. His owner was a neighbor who lived a block down. His name was Jesse. And the dog's name was, Pete could never remember. Though Jesse seemed eager to have Pete remember. It's that motivated Pete to pay attention to the dog's name. But 3 minutes after Jesse had left, the dog's name evaporated from Pete's mind like all that invisible, humidified air in the middle of the night. White. Just call him White, Pete told the kids one day when they couldn't remember either. Truth was, Pete didn't understand what people saw in their dogs. Couldn't understand why people put up with them. Thought that cities should ban all these undisciplined dogs who never returned when their masters called, and felt that they could use the parks as toilets that didn't flush. Millions spent on dogs, probably billions in North America, Pete once complained to Mary. People care for their dogs more than, well, what about Zorro? She asked. Yeah, well, Zorro's different. He's smart. He flushes. Jesse lived alone, traveled back and forth from the oil fields up north. 2 weeks off, 3 weeks on, something like that. Jesse often knocked on the back door and asked if Zorro could come out and run around with his dog. Although White was beneath Zorro, obviously, Zorro didn't seem to know and obligingly ran with White until White got tired. Oddly enough, Jesse loved White with a devotion as a groom would adore his wife. Oddly enough, Jesse was highly considerate of Zorro as the two dogs ran circles in the backfield. Pete understood how Jesse could like Zorro, but was puzzled about Jesse's infatuation with White. It happened on an early Saturday evening, which began on a late Saturday afternoon. Jesse and his dog had come by the back alley and had called for Zorro. Pete came out like he always did, determined to show Jesse that he was community-minded, into sharing Zorro, and to demonstrate the joy of reaching out to your neighbor. He had been told that everyone was doing it, this socialization business. People who lived in loving and helpful, loving communities lived longer. Pete had read about it in the National Geographic magazine at his doctor's office, front page article. Pete was getting better at being genuine about reaching out. "Hey, Jesse," he shouted too loudly from the back porch. "I'm gonna take him for a spin?" Take him for a spin. Pete sounded witty and enthusiastic. "Yeah," Jesse called back. "Locust and Zorro will be back in a half an hour. Have a cold one waiting." "For sure," Pete shouted back, releasing Zorro, who was all too pleased to join. What was that name? Logert? Something like that? Why these complicated names for these dumb animals, Pete thought. And wait, did Jesse just invite himself over for a beer? And had he just said yes? How did that happen? Did he have any beer in the house? Pete wasn't sure. It was 5:30 in the afternoon. Did he even feel like having a beer and dropping everything that he was doing? Well, he hadn't been doing anything, but now that he was trapped in having a beer with Jesse, he thought of all the things he could be doing. And would Jesse want to stay for supper? Probably. Mary was already preparing the hamburger meat. Supper was 30 minutes away. Pete never knew what to talk about with Jesse. Didn't know much about the oil patch. The whole oil and gas industry kind of confused him, intimidated him. "It's just a beer," Mary said. She had somehow snuck up behind him on the back porch. "You can chat about the flames or even ask him how he's really doing. Jesse's a good man." Pete stared at his wife. How did she do that? "You know these meaningful conversations drive me crazy," Pete said, deadpanned. Mary smiled, mocking him. "You stress out too much. Just have a beer and see what happens. Be yourself." "And who would that be?" Pete said, turning around again to face the back alley. "And we've got 3 beers left in the fridge in the garage," she smiled. "You can do this, honey." She walked up behind him and grabbed his behind just hard enough to be startling. She whispered in his ear, "I love you," and then was gone before Pete could erase any thoughts. 20 minutes later, the back gate creaked open, and Zorro and Whitey, or White, or Lore Rock, whatever, arrived back with Jesse parading behind them. "I'm thirsty for that beer," Jesse said. "Logust and Zorro had a great run. Tried for a rabbit and both lost. You should have seen them. Zorro is such a great dog. Logust. 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 Logust." Peter fought to remember, repeating the name over and over again as Logust, trying to follow a conversation with Jesse all the while. "I'll get those beers," said Pete, taking deep breaths in the garage. Mary said he could do this. Pete wished Jesse would have asked for a beer rather than simply demand one. He had demanded one, hadn't he? On the other hand, he had just spent 30 minutes running the dog. Then again, hadn't that been a privilege? It was Zorro after all. Jesse was already relaxing on the patio chairs on the back deck when Pete walked out of the garage door with the honey brew. Smells like dinner, he said, reaching for the beer. Have you eaten yet? Peter heard the question coming out of his mouth. In loving communities, folks live longer. In loving communities, folks live longer. The Finleys will be dropping by a little later too, Mary announced. They're coming with some dessert. Oh, that's nice, Pete said. You've done some great things with the backyard, Jesse said. I can't seem to find the time. And I'm not that good at it. Turned out Jesse was pretty knowledgeable about the oil and gas business, though. Pete found himself mildly intrigued by the intricacies of the industry. Pete, your house here has got natural gas heat, right? Yeah. Did you know that natural gas is connected via a continuous network of pipes to tens of thousands of wells drilled into the subterranean rock strata? Jesse explained. That were laid down tens of millions of years ago? I didn't know that, said Pete. Modern civilization would collapse in a matter of a month if the oil stopped flowing, Jesse concluded. Would you mind passing the ketchup? Pete felt emasculated. The word petroleum comes from the Greek word petros and the Latin word oleum, meaning rock and oil, Jesse said. Before petroleum was coined by a German scientist, George Bauer, in 1556, people simply called it rock oil. George Bauer has nothing to do with the hockey skates. Jesse laughed. What was the point of living longer in a loving community if you felt emasculated all the time, Pete thought. Another thing, Jesse was on a roll with a mouthful of tomato, lettuce, and cheese. It's common knowledge that oil comes from decomposing dinosaurs and plant matter. After all, it's called fossil fuels, right? But actually, that's wrong. Really, Pete said. Yeah. Though most scientists believe that oil has a biological origin, they don't believe that oil comes from dinosaurs. Hello! It comes from single-celled planktons that flourished, died, and then decomposed hundreds of millions of years ago. Might you have another beer? I'll get one, Pete said. The burgers were just great. And Mary and Jesse joked back and forth about everything, from fashion to politics. Mary understood Jesse. Soon the Finleys, from 2 houses down, were planted on the back porch as well, enjoying dessert, which looked a lot like cherry pie and ice cream. The Finleys had surprised them all by bringing over another case of beer. The 2 dogs were running around the house all this time, pretty much staying within sight. The Finleys had 2 kids, Andrew and Sharon's age, so everything seemed to be happening at once. Tonight is Logist's bath night, Jesse announced, taking Logists in his arms. Gonna scrub him up good. Logist didn't like baths at first. I might give him a bit of a trim too. Maybe I'll stay for one more beer and head her home. Logist darted off with Zorro. Pete offered him one of the Finley's beers. Jesse was telling them all about an episode when Logist was just a puppy when they heard it coming from the front of the house. There had been construction on the Blackfoot Trail, and motorists were being directed through the narrow avenues, and one in particular on 16th Street. The screeching had been followed by a thud, a sickening thump, and without a pause, the entire neighborhood heard the sound of a yelp of pain, followed by a silence of fear and all-knowing. Screeching, thumping, yelp, silence, all in the span of half a second. The world began moving like something underwater. Quiet, slow motion. It was in this surreal moment that Pete gave himself away. He said what he said would haunt him that night, staring up at the ceiling without seeing it in the dark. after he had said it so innocently, he would have an odd flashback to Luke's face after he realized the wolf pack had saved his life, but not out of love. Everyone leaped to their feet. The Finleys, Mary, Jesse, Pete, the children stopped and all stormed to the front of the house like a tornado set free. As they leaped, fearing the worst, Pete said it. I hope it's not Zorro. He said it as instinctively as he disliked other dogs' poop, as impulsively as he disliked traditions that weren't his own, as competitively as he bought and sold on Kijiji, determined always to get the better deal. I hope it's not Zorro. Jesse glanced over to Pete. It was like the rooster had just crowed 3 times.
Saw my life go flashing by in the eyes of a faithful friend. 4 legs, 4 lives, and the screeching tires never seem to end. I will change if Lester lives, not messing around just 'cause I own him. He was nearly wiped away, but he had good luck and strong bones. You make me clench my teeth, as humans ain't got much dignity. Eat my plants and steal my things. You're the head of security. I will change if Lester lives, not messing around just 'cause I own him. He was nearly wiped away, but he had good luck and strong bones. Inside and behind him, I will change if Lester lives, not messing around just 'cause I own him. He was nearly wiped away, but he had good luck and strong bones.